How? Okay. So in the last lecture, okay. आपको लास्ट क्लास की रिकॉर्डिंग जो है ये हमारे जितने भी लेक्चर्स हैं ये YouTube पे आपको अवेलेबल होंगे। जो दोनों मैंने पास लेक्चर्स दिए हैं उसकी रिकॉर्डिंग YouTube पे CSS कॉर्नर के पेज पे आप जाएं और वहां पे आपको मिल जाएगी, ठीक है। सो नाउ आई एम जस्ट फोकसिंग ऑन दिस लेक्चर राइट नाउ एंड देन we'll discuss, we'll see that if we'll have enough time because थोड़े टेक्निकल इश्यूज हैं as usual because of the weather and everything। तो इंटरनेट की भी जो कनेक्टिविटी प्रॉब्लम्स हैं जिसकी वजह से मैंने जो है और वीडियो इस वक्त बंद की हुई है। So unfortunately, but inshallah in the coming lectures, we'll have more time for the discussion and the class will be more properly structured, keeping in mind all the, the possibilities of having a technical issue, etc. So coming back to the topic, which was the Mughal Empire. So basically we mentioned a little bit about the Zahiruddin Muhammad Babur. So before we start with Zahiruddin Muhammad Babur, we'll give you an overview. I'll give you an overview about the Mughal dynasty or the Mughal Empire. So Mughal Empire dates from 1526 till 1858. So these are the 3 centuries from 16th to 18th century. Mughal Empire was a Turkic Mongol dynasty that ruled mostly the North India from 16th to 18th century, and it continued to exist in a reduced and powerless entity even after that. So even in the 19th century we saw Mughal rulers, however their power was not as the level of that which we had witnessed in the 16th, 17th and 18th century. सही है? अच्छा, मैं आप लोगों से फिर ये सवाल करूंगी because I would prefer, although I would want to continue with this lecture in English, but I still feel that I should include Urdu as well, so that if there are certain points which could be which we can learn better in Urdu, or which can be understood better in Urdu by a lot of people, because obviously English is not is not a mother tongue. Like a lot of people don't know how to do it, but obviously CSS के लिए आपको जरूरी है कि English में you need to be fluent, you need to be you need to be able to understand English well. So for that purpose only I'm sticking to English. Otherwise if there's any confusion you can ask me in the chat, और आप मुझे बता सकते हैं कि अगर एक कोई भी specific point ऐसा है जो कि मैं elaborate करूं तो please mention it, और वो chat में आप question लिख लीजिएगा. Okay, coming back to the Mughal Empire, it dates from 16th to 18th century, and we know that it spread Islam in the South Asia through different. What is Mughal Empire famous for? For its art and culture as well as obviously faith. So it spread Islam in South Asia through arts and culture, as well as through different, as well as through faith and through practicing or governing as a Muslim empire in South Asia. So Mughal ruled for almost 7 generations, and they showcased the unusual talent of administration of a huge population. Even during the Mughal Empire, we are familiar with the fact that Muslims were a minority, a very small minority at that time. And the fact that they ruled over such a huge population, it shows that they had this unusual talent, which includes their administrative policies, their political reforms, which we'll obviously cover, inshallah, in this lecture or maybe in the next class, because we have ample amount of time to cover this particular topic, because Mughal Empire से related भी सवाल आते हैं. Mughal Empire से related सवाल could be like a question जो आते हैं, they could be specific to a particular era, like Babur's era, or there is usually questions like कि Babur और Akbar के era को define करें कि how Babur cannot be called as the father of the Mughal Empire, but it was Akbar who was the father of the Mughal Empire. ऐसा question भी आया है past papers में. फिर there are usually Aurangzeb के era में और Akbar के era में there are parallels that are drawn between them, and there's comparison between both of these periods, which were very successful period, both of them, in terms of administration, in terms of governance, and obviously both were very popular, as well as both were very controversial figures in their own regards. So ज्यादातर सवाल मुगल एम्पायर पे जो एक सवाल है, वो एक सवाल इस तरह नहीं आएगा कि आपको सारे एम्परर्स के बारे में सवाल पूछा जाएगा. Mostly you'll ask you questions with respect to one particular era, or they will draw the comparison, or maybe it would be about administrative policies or any sort of political reforms in any particular area of the, in any particular era of that particular king ruler. Is it clear? Okay. Now, so we were talking about that. We were just giving the overview or the introduction of Mughal Empire. We know that Mughals were famous for integrating Muslims and Hindus in that period. Okay. Okay. So Mughals were basically famous for integration of Muslims and Hindus. Most of the Mughal rulers, specifically Akbar, that we'll discuss later in the class as well, Akbar was famous for the integration, and even Babur for that matter, although he was called as a foreigner, he was a foreign invader, but he was also very famous for the integration between the Muslims and the Hindus. And it wasn't because obviously they were invaders, but it was a very, it was a very clever or a very strong point, which was of the Mughal emperors, कि ये इनकी administrative policy थी, which actually was a very strong point, which helped them in governance of such a huge population. At its peak, the Mughal, at the peak of the Mughal Empire in 1690, it ruled almost over 4 million square kilometers. 4 million square kilometers का जो subcontinent का area है, which was almost 160 million की करीब जो population थी, it was ruled by Mughal Empire. So it was a very, coming back to Hindu and Muslim integration, it was a very, I'm forgetting this particular word, but it was a very wise decision, or very, it was a very strong decision on their part, because they were aware of the socio-cultural fabric of the society. They were aware of it, and they were aware how it would affect the ruling Hindu majority at that time. And most of them supported the decisions that were made by the Mughals during that period. Obviously, they did face resistance by certain states. The earlier Mughals were not, they couldn't rule South Indian states. However, slowly and gradually, they annexed a lot of states in South India. They annexed a lot of states in East India as well. And at their peak in 1690, this was during the time of Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb, they ruled they included the South Indian state, which was never done before in the history, that Muslims, there was one empire that was ruling from Kandahar till South India and Bengal, Assam, all of these states were under their rule. Now we'll come to the first Mughal ruler, that was Zahiruddin Muhammad Babur. So Zahiruddin Muhammad Babur's era was of only 4 years. So his rule was from 1526 till 1530. What was the event that happened in 1526? It was the first Battle of Panipat, which was on 21st April. He defeated the last of the Lodhis. His name was Ibrahim Lodhi. And Babur, who was born in Farghana, he defeated him at the Battle of Panipat in 1526. So coming back to the introduction of Babur a bit, Babur was a Mughal who was of Timurid descendant. He was a Timurid descendant as well. Temur was also called as Tamerlane in English or in different literature. He was a Central Asian Turkic. He was a Central Asian Turkic of Farghana Valley. So Farghana is in modern day Uzbekistan. We can find Farghana there. And he was only 14 when he became a king of Central Asian Kingdom of Farghana. And he wanted to rule Samarkand. It was his dream to rule Samarkand and Kabul. And he felt that he was destined to rule Samarkand and Kabul. However, he fought many battles. He even lost, and he couldn't conquer Samarkand. Eventually, in 1504, he ventured and he eventually conquered Kabul. And India at that time was obviously a very fragmented society. It was a divided society. There were, as we are already aware of the fact that in Delhi Sultanate, there were many dynasties for like 3 centuries. There was one dynasty, it peaked, then it declined, and eventually other ruler came and they ruled. However, The society was very fragmented. It was divided. Many of the foreign people, they were Afghans who were ruling. There were Turkic people who were ruling at that time, and the locals were not happy with the situation. And there was during as compared to other dynasties during this period, during Delhi Sultanate, obviously there were certain administrative policies that were taken, and they had there was a little work that was done in terms of their contribution in art and architecture as well. Yes, Babur wanted to rule Samarkand, yes, because he was from Uzbekistan, which is modern day Uzbekistan. So it was his dream to rule Samarkand. However, he eventually failed to conquer it. In fact, he conquered Kabul in 1504, and he ventured and conquered Kabul. So coming back to the Delhi Sultanate and how it left the society fragmented, and how it left the people of Delhi and the northern India vulnerable to many more attacks, because there were many conspiracies during this period. Obviously, the society was, they were India at that time. All these conquerors or warriors, they couldn't establish a dynasty like that of Mughal Empire, because they didn't have the stronghold, they didn't have time. They were constantly facing rebellions internally. They wanted to control and annex as many of the local states as possible. However, whenever they wanted to control or venture forward, and because that's what they learned, they were conquerors, right? But what would happen, one area or one state would be conquered, the other state would be annexed. And obviously they were constantly under different threats internally and externally, in terms of Mongol invasions during in 13th 14th century. So coming back to the Mughal Empire at that time, it was India was heavily fragmented. It was divided, Muslims and Hindus. Both rulers lacked the concern for the normal people and their development and their welfare. So the shifts in the power in the Central Asia and Afghanistan forced Babur to conquer Kabul, and obviously, eventually, he decided to move towards divided India. Okay. Now, Babur, who was not only a descendant of Temur, but he was also a descendant of Genghis Khan. So from a maternal side, I'm not sure from which side he was a descendant of Temur, but from one side he was a descendant of Temur, and from the other side he was a descendant of Genghis Khan. And he had the strength of Mongols. He had the wisdom of Temur. So finally, he invaded India. So Babur ke attacks jo the, it wasn't the Battle of the Panipat wasn't the first attack of Babur. In fact, it was the last attack. So the first time that Babur attacked or Babur invaded India was the first time when he wanted to suppress the revolt of Yusufzai tribesmen in 1519. The second time he attacked due to the Khizr Khail revolt to take control of Peshawar. So those first invasion that happened in 1519. Then in 1520, he invaded India for the third time to capture the areas of Sialkot. In the fourth time, he wanted to invade India, and he wanted to have the support of the nobles of Ibrahim Lodi, who were the Awan nobles at that time, and who basically deserted Ibrahim Lodi, and this included Daulat Khan, Dilawar Khan, and Alam Khan. However, they eventually deserted Babur as well, and he couldn't benefit from their support. And finally, in 1525, 1526, Babur invaded India for the fifth time and the last time, which was in the first Battle of Panipat that was fought on 21st April 1526, where he defeated Ibrahim Lodi, who was killed and Delhi and Agra, these territories were occupied, and Babur ascended the throne, and he put an end to the Sultanate of Delhi and starting the Mughal era. Now we know that we know that Babur was only 14 when he became the king, and now he is in India. And to consolidate his position, he had invaded India 5 times. His fifth expedition was the Battle of Panipat. Babur's army, during the Battle of Panipat, Babur's army was obviously better equipped because they had guns. And meanwhile, the Sultan of Delhi, he only relied on elephants. Babur was successful because he used innovative tactics or warfare tactics during this battle, and it was for the very first time in the Indian history that the gunpowder was introduced, and which was never used in any warfare in India before. So basically, the local rulers, they had absolutely no idea how to overpower or how to compete with the innovation that was introduced by Babur and his forces. And Babur's innovative strategy obviously won them over, while Lodhi died fighting. Now, he ruled, as we know that, as we're aware of that, he ruled only for 3 to 4 years, and he passed away in 1530. And there were three famous battles during this period. Battle of Panipat was just the beginning. There were three famous battles. First one was in 1527, where his forces defeated Rana Sanga, who was the Raja of Mewar, in the Battle of Kamwaha near Agra. And this battle happened in March 16th, 1527. So Mewar को पहले किसने किया था, हम जब पिछली क्लास में आप सुनेंगे तो आपको पता चल जाएगा, देखेंगे कि खिलजी डायनेस्टी में भी जो है वो मेवाड़ के खिलाफ एनेक्स किया था और दिल्ली सल्तनत का पार्ट बनाया था. However, obviously these dynasties or these states would become part of the sultanates, and whenever these sultanates or dynasties would be on decline, they would go back being independent. However, during the Mughal period, the Raja of Mewar was obviously defeated in the Battle of Kamwaha by Babur again. Then the second famous battle of Babur was he captured Chanderi from the Rajputs. Obviously, Rajputs were constantly fighting the Mughal or the Muslim invaders from different dynasties or from different periods. And in 1527, he captured Chanderi from a Rajput chief whose name was Medini Rao. That happened in 1528. Then the last battle was in 1529, where he defeated Mahmud Lodi in the Battle of Ghagra, which is in Bihar. And he was given the title of the Master of Hindustan. However, the Master of Hindustan could not enjoy the fruits of his own victories, as he passed away after 3 years or 4 years of his invasion, almost 3 to 4 years of his invasion. In December 26th, 1530, he was buried in Kabul as per his desire. Now, he was followed by his son, whose name was Nasiruddin Humayun. ये बहुत सारी जो ये हम बात अभी पढ़ रहे हैं about Mughals, this all might sound like a repetition of what you have studied before. However, it is important to study Mughals because obviously this is an integral part of the Indo Pak history. And while we know a lot about the Mughals, we know a lot about Mughals, but it is repeatedly asked in MCQs and in obviously Indo-Pak history के अंदर कोई चीज बहुत ज्यादा मुश्किल नहीं है, पर बहुत सारी डिटेल्स होती हैं छोटी छोटी जो कि आप भूल जाते हैं. तो जब आप पेपर के लिए प्रिपेयर कर रहे होते हैं, you are focusing on the wars or the issues that you haven't studied before at intermediate level or at graduation level. Obviously, everyone has different backgrounds, but still it is very important to revise all of that which we have read. Okay, so Babur के era में कुछ और specific उसकी policies नहीं थी. We are aware of the fact that Babur की जो एक policy थी that he introduced when he invaded India or when he established control over India was that he put a ban on the slaughtering of cows or the cow slaughter, because he wanted to obviously he wanted to gain support from the Hindus, and he wanted to make sure that other religions like Hinduism would be under his rule. They would be they were given the due share of respect. So this was one of the decisions that he made, which make him far more likable as compared to the other rulers who enforce Sharia, who enforce jizya. While these are not, these actions or these particular decisions are not criminal or they are not oppressive in general. However, for a Hindu majority or for a non-Muslim majority in a particular region, this could be labeled as oppressive, because these decisions do not reflect, or they are not these decisions are not coherent with their own culture, and they are not obviously these decisions are not made in the कि उसमें उनके culture के there was lack of cultural sensitivity shown by different invaders, okay, during this particular period. Now we come back to Zahiruddin Babar's era. Now he died. A lot of people believed that Humayun, who was quite ill when Babar passed away, a lot of people say that he died in return for his son's life. However, these we don't find much about it in the history. He cared a lot for his son, who lacked the luster and who lacked who was not the kind of an administrator who he was the eldest son of Babar, but he failed to assert the kind of strong monarchical authority that Babar had. So Nasiruddin Humayun was the eldest son of Babar, as we know that his period could be divided into his rule, which was from 1530 to 1540, and from 1540 to almost 1555, he was in exile. We will simultaneously learn more about the Humayun's era, as well as we learn about another important dynasty in the region. Obviously, this might not be in your syllabus, but it is very important to learn about the Sur dynasty, which was during this particular period. So Humayun's era could be divided from 1530 to 1540, and from 1540 to 1555 when he was in exile, and when he came back, he ruled for a year and a half before he passed away in an accident in 1556. So he was the eldest son of Babar. He would stay ill when he was he would get quite ill when he was young, and during this time a lot of people believe that Babar gave away his life in return of his life. And Humayun inherited a lot of problems because Babar couldn't live that long. So Humayun inherited a lot of problems in form of the Afghan nobles that were there. There was a constant threat of Rajputs and his treacherous brothers. Now, what happened in the earlier period of Humayun? So basically, Humayun came into power in 1530 after his father's death. Then he laid a he laid a partially successful siege to the fortress of Kalinjar in 1531. In 1532, he defeated the Afghan army led by Mahmud Lodhi at Dora, which is near Lucknow. So in 1532, he defeated Mahmud Lodhi. Mahmud Lodhi is the same person who was defeated before in the Battle of Ghagra at Bahar in 1529 by his father, Babar. In 1533, something very important happened. So this particular event in the history will be repeated again when we study the Sur dynasty. So in 1533, what happened? Humayun laid the siege to the fortress of Chunar. Chunar is basically that was under the siege of Afghan chief Sher Khan. Now, this Afghan chief is also famously known as Sher Shah Suri, as most of you must be aware of that. So there was a siege, and it ended in a treaty between Humayun and Sher Khan. Sher Khan was had controlled the fortress. He was the ruler there at Chunar. However, when Humayun attacked the fortress of Chunar, he was unsuccessful. Later on, there was a treaty between both of them, Humayun and Sher Khan, in 1533. In 1533, 1534, Malwa and Gujarat, both under Bahadur Shah, were captured by Humayun. He captured both of these states. Then 1536, he lost both of these states to Bahadur Shah again. In 1537, 1538, the fortress of Chunar under Sher Khan was captured by Humayun. So in 1537, 1538, he was successful. Humayun was successful, and finally he was successful in capturing the fortress of Chunar. Then there were two very famous battles that were fought between Humayun and Sher Khan. One was the Battle of Chausa in 1539, and where Humayun lost to Sher Khan. And in 1540, the Battle of Kannauj, where Humayun lost again to Sher Khan. Sher Khan assumed the title of Sher Shah Suri at that time, and he established the Sur dynasty. So Sur dynasty was officially established in 1540. In 1540 and 1541, Humayun fled from Kannauj to Delhi, and then Agra, and then finally to Sindh. We know that. These particular, both of these defeats led to the exile of Humayun from his own lands. The defeat was a huge setback for the young Mughal Empire at that time, and it led Humayun to stay in exile for 15 years from 1540 to 1555. You know that, right? Then he escaped to Iran via Sindh. He stayed in Sindh for some time, where he met Hamida Bano. Hamida Bano, he married her, and then he had a child by the name of Akbar in 1542. Now, return of Humayun and the early demise. Humayun, Humayun's rule, obviously, during this period, he went to Sindh. He couldn't stay there, but his return wasn't that easy. Humayun, who was also betrayed by his brother, had fled to Persia in the coming years. In 1545, in 1554, in fact, there was a treaty. There was a very important treaty between the ruler of Persia and Humayun, and his name was Tehmas Shah Tehmasp of Persia. And this treaty was signed by the help of Behram Khan. So Behram Khan was a very important figure in the Mughal history, and he was the one who helped Humayun at that time in signing the treaty between him and the king of Persia, or the ruler of Persia. In 1545, Humayun successfully conquered Kandahar and Kabul with the help of the Persian troops, and both came under the power of the Persian rulers at that time. So Kandahar and Kabul fell into the under the rule of Persian emperors. And in 1551, during this time, Humayun had battles against his own brothers. One of them was Askari. He was defeated, and he was then sent to exile to Makkah. His another brother, whose name was Hindal, Hindal supported Humayun. I hope whatever you are studying right now, it is clear. All of those people who are in the class, I hope it is clear so far what we've studied. We gave an overview of the Mughal Empire. It lasted for 3 different centuries. The overview of Delhi Sultanate, how both of them were different, how the situations were different, how the external and the internal threats both of these empires faced were different. How what led Babur to invade India eventually, how many years he ruled. He ruled for 4 years. What were his military campaigns, his strategy, his policies toward non-Muslim. However, he couldn't enjoy the fruits of his own victories and his own policies, but he was followed by Humayun, who was a comparatively weak ruler, and he was not a very strong monarch, and he faced a lot of troubles internally and externally. He faced success earlier on when he captured Gujarat and Malwa. However, he lost them again against Bahadur Shah. Then he came face to face with Sher Khan, who ruled or who had control of fortress of Chunar at that time. He was unsuccessful in ruling or in capturing the fortress of Chunar. Initially, he had a treaty with him. However, Humayun could not capture it successfully. However, in 1537, 1538, he successfully captured fortress of Chunar, and this led to 2 battles. One was Chausa, the other was Kannauj, and Humayun lost both of these battles against Sher Shah Suri. He was forced to go into exile at that time. He did not have any support because his brothers were against him. He was against Afghan nobles in the form of Sher Khan as well. And his empire also faced a threat against Rajputs. When he went into exile, he went to Sindh, where he met Hamida Bano, she eventually became his wife, but also the mother of his child Akbar, who was born in 1542. Say now Humayun decided to come back by forming an alliance with the help of Behram Khan, who's a very important figure in the Mughal history. And Behram Khan he helped him to sign the treaty between him and Persia, king of Persia. And then He successfully ruled, captured Kandahar and Kabul with the help of Persian troops. In 1551, he led many military campaigns against his own brothers. One was Askari. He was defeated and sent to exile to Makkah. His other brother's name was Hindal. He joined against third brother of Humayun, whose name was Kamran. Hindal died in the battle against Kamran. Now in 1553, Humayun captured Kamran. He blinded him and he sent him to exile in Makkah. And then in 1554, he returned. He made his return by capturing Peshawar, and the Sood dynasty was during this period. In 1555 was a very important period because it was during that period when Humayun successfully captured Lahore again. Then there were two main battles. One was Battle of Machiwara on 15th May 1555, where Humayun's forces under Behram defeated Sood dynasty's army. Then the second battle was the Battle of Sirhind in June 1555, where Mughal forces defeated the forces of Sood dynasty that were under Sikandar Suri. Now Humayun appointed his own son, who was very young at that time. His name was Akbar, as the governor of Punjab under the tutorship of Behram Khan. So he was under the tutorship of Behram Khan because Akbar was very young at that time, and Delhi and Agra were reoccupied. This time around, he seriously devoted himself in the affairs of the kingdom, and he sincerely wanted to improve the system of the government. However, in January 1556, he tragically slipped from the famous building of Deen Panna. This basically, his tomb is also located in Delhi, close to Deen Panna, which is also known as the Purana Killa area. And this particular site is considered as UNESCO declared World Heritage. I hope it's clear so far. Okay, so now we've covered Babur and Humayun. Now we come to the third and one of the most famous Mughal ruler. The third one is Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar. His era is called as the Golden Period, and he is said to be one of the greatest rulers of all time. Not only South Asian ruler or Muslim ruler, but generally he was one of the most famous rulers during this particular period in history. And he was only 13 when his father died. He was, as we know, that he was under the tutorship of Bahram Khan during this time. He was Akbar's story does not start from his rule. In fact, his story starts from his initial period when he was born in 1542, when his father was in exile. Okay. Okay, so Akbar was born in 1542, as we know, and okay, so he was born in 1542 in Sindh, and he was very young when he was held hostage by Humayun's brothers. As we are aware that Humayun and his brothers didn't get along, and they faced each other in the battle. And in 1540, from 1543 till 1545, he was held hostage by Humayun's brothers, and in 1546 he was reunited with Humayun. And in 1546 and 1547, he was again held captive by Kamran, who was Humayun's brother. And Humayun recaptured Kabul during this period, and Akbar was finally united with his father. In 1551, he was appointed as the governor of Ghazna, and after his or during his father's, like in his father's life, he was appointed as the governor of Punjab in 1555. From 1556, he was only 13 years old, but as we are aware that he was under the tutorship of Bahram Khan. Now, in 1556, we know that he went into a war against Himu, who was the vizier of Adil Shah Suri, and who he had captured and attacked Delhi and Agra after Humayun's death. And this led to the second battle of Panipat, where Bahram Khan, who was Akbar's tutor, defeated Himu and he beheaded him, and Himu's father was captured during this time. Now, I'm sorry, I missed a certain part, which was the Suri dynasty, which we were supposed to do before we ventured into Akbar's period. Okay. Okay, now. So before we begin with Akbar's period, let's reel back a bit and focus on Sher Shah Suri and the Suri dynasty. So basically, who was Sher Shah Suri? Sher Shah Suri was not born with the name of Sher Shah. In fact, he was given it later. He was born with the name of Farid Khan. I hope there is no confusion. मैंने Akbar की, before I start with Akbar, I wanted to talk about Sher Shah Suri and the Sur dynasty. This is not part of the syllabus, so please don't get confused. It's just that you need to understand the context of the Sur dynasty and its impact, especially during the Humayun's period. And this, if it wasn't for the Sher Shah Suri, Humayun wouldn't have been in exile for 15 years. And the history wouldn't have been very different, or the Mughal history would have been very different. So, briefly, we are going to touch the Sur dynasty before we start with Akbar, or before we go on with Akbar's period. अच्छा, ये सारी हिस्ट्री जो है वो मैं chronologically आपको explain तो कर रही हूँ. It's just that when it comes to Babur and Humayun specifically, because they were under so many threats and their policies were mostly, their policies or their administrative policies were not mentioned that much, and it is more about their military campaigns as compared to Akbar, who ruled for 50 to 60 years. तो उनसे रिलेटेड जो सवाल आते हैं वो ज्यादातर एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव पॉलिसीज के और उनकी हाउ दे वर एज अ लीडर एंड व्हाट वर देयर पॉलिसीज और देयर पॉलिटिकल रिफॉर्म्स एटसेट्रा, तो वो उसमें जो है आप मेंशन करते हैं. सो प्लीज डोंट गेट कंफ्यूज्ड एंड डोंट थिंक के आई एम गोइंग chronologically, so I'm not mentioning this. I will mention the rule, every ruler separately, okay? And I'll try to focus on each ruler separately. So now coming back to Sher Shah Suri, Sher Shah Suri was born in 1472, and his father at that time was his father's name was Jamal Khan, and his name was Farid Khan basically, and he was born in under the rule of Behlul Lodhi. Behlul Lodhi जिस जमाने में था was the last ruler who basically laid the foundation of the Lodi dynasty, and which was the last dynasty of the Delhi Sultanate. We know that, right? In 1494, his father was finally transferred to South Bihar by Sikandar Lodi, and Farid Khan left home and he went to Jaunpur, and where he rised among the intelligentsia. From 1497 till 1520, he became his father's manager. And in 1521, he became the master of the Jagir. His father passed away, and he joined the service of Bahar Khan Lohani, who was the Afghan governor of Bihar. So, Afghan governor of South Bihar, he basically joined his service. And for next 6 years, from 1521 till 1527, he worked for Bahar Khan Lohani. During this his service to Bahar Khan Lohani, there was a lion which he single-handedly killed, and he protected Bahar Khan Lohani, and Farid Khan was given the title of Sher Khan from Bahar Khan. So this is where this name Sher Khan came from. Now in 1527, Sher Khan entered the service of Babur during this time, during his victory of Panipat. However, in 1528, Babur became suspicious of Sher Khan, and he dismissed him. And Sher Khan went back to Bahar Khan, and he started to work for him again. In 1530, he became an independent ruler when Bahar Khan Lohani died. And Sher Khan then married a widow who was a widow of the ruler of Chunar. This is how he controlled the fortress of Chunar, which we talked about during Humayun's period. Okay. Now in 1530, from 1532 to 1533, this was the period of Humayun's first siege of the fortress of Chunar, which was made unsuccessful by Sher Khan during this period. And Sher Khan was successful in Bihar, in Bengal in the coming years of 1533, 1534. He captured Bihar in 1530. From 1534 to 36, he invaded Bengal, and whose ruler's name was Mahmud Shah, and he asked for Humayun for help. Humayun didn't give him help. In fact, he invaded fortress of Chunar in 1537 and 1538, as we've discussed it when we were studying about Humayun. And his second siege was successful. However, Sher Khan, when the fortress of Chunar came under the control of Humayun, he was forced to flee, and then he went to Rohtas. He captured the fortress of Rohtas, and there he shifted his treasure and army there. And then he prepared for the two of the most important battles during this period. One was the Battle of Chausa, and the other was the Battle of Kannauj. Both were in 1539 and 1540 respectively, and both were won by Sher Khan. And Sher Khan then proclaimed the emperor of northern India, and he assumed the title of Sher Shah. And after in 1540, when Sher Khan brought Delhi and Agra under his rule as well, he established the Soor dynasty. Now, after which we know that Humayun went into an exile in 1514, 1541. Sher Shah, we know he captured Punjab. Then in 1540, in 1540, in 1541, he suppressed the revolt in Bengal. In 1542, he conquered Malwa, he conquered Raizan. He led a campaign against the Rajputs of Rajasthan. He conquered Multan. Finally, in 1544 and 45, he died during his siege in Bundelkhand due to fatal injuries. This was a blast during this siege, and as a result of that, Sher Shah died. And reign of Sher Shah's was obviously his younger brother replaced him, and he took this title of Islam Shah Suri. And then after his rule, he ruled for almost 8 years till 1553. And then he was replaced by his son. His son's name was Firoz Shah Suri. He ruled only for a few days when his maternal uncle, Muhammad Mubaris Khan, who took the title of Adil Shah, Muhammad Adil Shah. And he ascended the throne in 1553, 1554. And however, he was not as powerful as his Hindu wazir, whose name was Hem Chandra, aka Hemo. So Hemo was his name was Hem Chandra, and he was famously called Hemo. And in 1555, the empire was split between two of the brother-in-laws of Adil Khan. One was Ibrahim Shah Suri, and the other was Sikandar Shah Suri. Ibrahim Shah Suri defeated Adil Shah, and then he became the Sultan. Then Adil Shah held the areas during this time from Agra to Bihar, etc. And then Sikandar Shah defeated Ibrahim Shah and became the Sultan of Agra. And Sikandar Shah is defeated by the Mughals under Humayun and Bahram Khan. We know that in 1555, when Humayun came back, he took control from Sikandar Shah. Sikandar Shah was the person who was defeated finally. And that is how the rule of Mughals were re-established. So this was basically a brief history of the Soor dynasty and how they captured or how they ruled during this period from in the 15 years that they ruled from 1540 when Humayun fled till 1555 when Sikandar Shah Suri, who was the last of the Suris, who was defeated by Humayun in 1555. So yeah, now we head back to Akbar, which we had started before. Now we'll head back to him. So Akbar we know that Akbar is one of the greatest rulers of all time. He was only 13 when his father died. He is famous. He fortified the foundations of the Mughal Empire. He made the Mughal Empire that it famously become. If it wasn't for his rule, he was not only a very famous administrator, but he was a very popular leader. And for some people, he was also a controversial Muslim ruler as well. So we'll look into all of these aspects individually, how Akbar was as an administrator, how he was as a popular Indian leader, and how he was as a controversial Muslim ruler. Okay. So we know that Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar was one of the greatest rulers during his period. We know that. We also know, okay. Okay. So we know that Akbar was born before he became the ruler. He was born when his father was in exile. Then he was taken hostage by his brother, Humayun's brothers, and he was finally free in 1547. In 1551, he was appointed as the governor of Ghazna during his life of his father. In 1555 and 1556, he was appointed as the governor of Punjab. Mind you, he was very young during this time, so he ruled under the tutorship of Bahram Khan. Then in 1556, now Hemu, that we already know who he was the vizier of Adil Shah, whose real name was Mubaris Khan. and he ruled in the Suri dynasty. So he attacked and captured Delhi and Agra after Humayun's death. So after Humayun's death, Himu was obviously there and he wasn't defeated. So he attacked Delhi and Agra. And the second battle of Panipat was fought by Bahram Khan, who was Akbar's tutor. He defeated Himu and he beheaded him. And his father was captured at Mewat by the Mughals and he was treated generously. Now in 1557, I hope it is clear so far. If there's any confusion or if you have any question, you can ask me. Also, to all those people who might be listening to this lecture on YouTube, you can ask your questions. You can write your questions in the comments, and I'll read them and I can answer them there. And or either I can pick them up from there and then discuss it in the next class as well. Now, because obviously history is a lot of dates and a lot of events, and we won't have a discussion until we discuss it from the analytical point of view, or we analyze it from, with respect to political decisions or administrative decisions at that time, or any social cultural changes that were observed. When it comes to events, they have to be told as they are. So this all might sound very repetitive, or it may sound like it's just a chronological sequence of events that are happening one after the other. However, if we look at the history from if we look at the overview of a particular dynasty or a civilization, or any empire, this is how we look one year after the other. So yes, so this you have to memorize the battle, you have to memorize the dates. I hope it is not that difficult. Okay, there's someone who wrote in the chat. Okay, so could it be okay? So I was just talking about generally about how the situation was at that time. Himu was basically the vizier, or he was the minister of Adil Khan. We know that, right? And he was from the Sur dynasty. And when the Sur dynasty ended by the return of Humayun, but unfortunately Humayun passed away in 1556, and which meant that his son, who was only 13 years old, he was the ruler. And when because he was so young, and he was under the tutorship of Bahram Khan at that time, which gave them the opportunity, or the enemies of the Mughals, opportunity to attack Delhi and Agra. And Himu attacked Delhi and Agra in 1556, which led to the second battle of Panipat, where he was defeated. सही. अच्छा, इस लेक्चर की रिकॉर्डिंग भी है, ठीक है? तो आप सिर्फ, अगर आपको सुनना है, आप लिखना चाह रहे हैं तो आप लिख लें, बट अगर आपको रिकॉर्डिंग में आप इस अपॉर्चुनिटी को, ऑल दोस पीपल हु आर लिसनिंग टू मी लाइव or listening to this lecture live, use this opportunity to ask questions so that I can answer them. Okay. But obviously I am going to tell you about the history, and we're going to discuss it as well. But right now we're looking at the different events during each period of, or each ruler. और मैं कोशिश कर रही हूँ कि टॉपिक में हेडिंग बाय हेडिंग करूँ, जिस तरह आपने जवाब लिखने होंगे एग्जाम्स में. और obviously it depends on how the question is asked. In the exams, it's not going to be as straightforward. Obviously they'll ask from an analytical point of view, or they might ask for you to tell the events in a particular period of history or under particular empire. But most probably the questions will not be as straightforward. अगर कोई generic सा सवाल है तो उसमें आपके पास बहुत सारा option होता है. आप headings डाल के introduction दे सकते हैं, overview दे सकते हैं, फिर आप events को jot down कर सकते हैं. और I wanted to share a bit about how you would how you would go about in the exams themselves. Past papers भी discuss करने थे, but ये कि चूंकि technical glitches बहुत सारे हो रहे हैं, so I'm sticking to what I plan to teach in this particular class. So now we know that in Akbar's period, Akbar के period में सबसे जो important चीज थी वो यही थी कि second battle of Panipat, which was one of the most famous battles during his period. Then in 1557, Akbar and Bahram defeated Sikandar Suri, and they sent him into exile to Bengal, and this brought the Suri dynasty to an end in name as well as in fact. So Sikandar Suri was finally defeated by Akbar and Bahram 1557, and Sikandar Suri was defeated for the last time, and this brought an end to Suri dynasty officially. Now in 1558, 1559, Gwalior and Ajmer were captured. In 1560, the Mughal forces occupied Jaunpur and later Banaras as well. Then during this period, an internal turmoil arised, or there was an internal turmoil. That was Akbar dismissed Bahram Khan. Now, Bahram Khan was an integral part of his rule, and when he was dismissed, obviously there were a lot of suspicions arised because of his decisions and because of what because of all the Bahram Khan और अकबर के दरमियान जितने भी there was this turmoil जो था ये सारा, उसकी वजह से there were a lot of suspicions that were raised. Now in 1561, the Haram party forced Akbar basically to move against Bahram Khan, and thus it provoked the latter to rebel. Now Bahram Khan was defeated, but he was sent on his way to Makkah, and on his journey to Makkah, he was killed by his enemies, his personal enemies in Gujarat. Now in 1562, in Akbar then married. Who did he marry? He married Rajkumari Heer Kanwari. Her name was Rajkumari Heer Kanwari, aka Jodha Bai, and in 1563, his famous, one of his famous actions or administrative policy, that was the abolishment of the pilgrimage tax, was imposed on Hindus. In 1564, he abolished jizya. Mind you, jizya was imposed by almost all the rulers in this region, including Mahmud Ghaznavi as well. And as we've discussed in the past, and jizya was imposed by all the other rulers, and he abolished it. Akbar abolished it. A lot of hard Muslims, or the Muslims, conservative Muslims, were of this opinion that this decision was a matter of appeasement, just to appease Hindu majority population. However, it was a very significant policy of Akbar to create harmony, or to create a social-cultural his social cultural policies were dominated by or diplomatic policies were dominated by the peaceful initiatives, or the initiatives that he took to establish peace, specifically when it comes to people from different religion. Okay, so this was one of his actions. Now if we look at his period or his rule from as an administrator, or as a leader, or as a controversial Muslim ruler. ठीक है? अच्छा, अब उसके बाद हम before we head further, I'm sorry, there was an interruption in the middle. Okay, so where were we? We were in Akbar. We were focusing on Akbar. Okay, so Akbar के rule में जो है वो ये था कि Akbar was as an administrator. If we focus on Akbar as an administrator, if we discuss Akbar as an administrator, his era was basically, or his reign was majorly peaceful, because his diplomacy, and he had a conciliatory policy towards non-Muslims, which led him to become very popular among the majority of the people during his period. He was a very capable ruler, and he was proponent of religious and ethnic tolerance and harmony. We know that, right? And he's set up a host of institutions that build the foundations of an administrative system that operated even in British India. So as an administrator, Akbar was, because he was proponent of peace, and that was probably this was the reason why he ruled for as long as he ruled. He established his rule, and he was a very popular leader among people as well. And his administrative policies, so his administrative policies, or why he was popular, we know both of these points coincide each other. So you can mention these points of diplomatic policies or conciliatory policy की जो points हैं वो आप popular Indian leader के points में भी इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं. So as a popular Indian leader, we know that he was his policies towards the non-Muslims, and how he introduced religious innovation, his land revenue system, and the Mansabdari system, basically, which became the basis of the Mughal military organization. and civil administration were the highlights of his reign. So basically, the Mansabdari system was so famous that it not only was it did provided it provided the foundation for the future Mughal rulers, but it also formed the basis of the civil military system that was established by the British later on. And these were the highlights of his reign. Okay. Now, Akbar, as a controversial Muslim ruler, he received a lot of criticism for his religious innovations. We know that he introduced Deen-e-Ilahi, as we all are aware of it. His non-imposition of jizya, as we have mentioned on Muslims, was a very controversial decision. He declared that the killing of the animals on the holy days of Jainism, he banned that killing of animals. So these three were very controversial decisions that he took, or the administrative decisions that he took during his period. He was also criticized for patronizing scholars and their literary work. And in fact, he was criticized for his work in the form of Akbarnama. And he was also criticized for, how his scholars of the court, which were called Noratan, they were there, and how their work was not only censored, but it was also it focused on the Akbar's policy, and it focused on appeasing, basically the fact that the scholars were present in the court, and they were heavily criticized by a lot of Sufi reformers during this period. So these were the points, or these were basically the issues that were raised by many people, not only during this period, but also after his period, and how they criticized him as a Muslim ruler who didn't focus on establishing a Muslim rule, but in fact he wanted his rule was secular in nature, which obviously made him. But was it actually secular? That is also a point, because he introduced his own religion, and while he presented it as for the sake of creating harmony between Hindus and Muslims, but in fact it was to establish or to reinforce his own rule on the people. So basically, these were the main points of Akbar as an administrator, and as a leader, and as how he was a controversial figure. Most of the times, Akbar's rule is compared with that of Aurangzeb's rule. So if there's a question that comes in which you have to describe Akbar's rule and the Aurangzeb's rule, what you can do is that you have to briefly give an introduction of both of them. Describe both of their rules, give an overview of them as leaders, and then you have to mention the how they were popular. Both of them were popular separately, how they were popular as leaders, and how they were controversial as leaders, and then you can compare both of their rules. Okay. अच्छा, now we know in history हमने उनकी जो battles थी वो हमने discuss की. एक तो Battle of Panipat discuss की, then we discussed how Akbar and Bahram defeated Sikandar Suri. We also talked about how the Bahram Khan was dismissed, which created a turmoil in the empire in 1560, 1561. When then Bahram Khan died in 1562, he married Jodha Bai. And in 1564, he took the controversial decision of abolishing jizya. And then he put down a lot of rebels, which included Afghans and Uzbeks. And then Mughal pressure was continued against the Rana Uday Singh of Chittor afterwards. Okay, now there were many battles that were fought against Rajput states of Jodhpur, Bikaner, and Jaisalmer. They also became part of the Mughal Empire. Then Gujarat was captured by the Mughals in 1572 to 1573. Rana Pratap Singh, who was the son of Uday Singh of Mewar, continued the anti-Mughal resistance from 1572 to 1597. In 1573, the town of Sikri, which is known as Fatehpur Sikri, was founded 1573 mein. Or Bihar and Bengal were also conquered by Mughal forces in 1570. From 1574, 1576. 1575 mein Akbar had an Ibadat Khana made at Fatehpur Sikri. He also had, in 1579, he has the infallibility decree of infallibility decree was issued during this period. Then he also took control of Kabul from 1581 till 1585. In 1582, he propounded Deen-e-Ilahi, as we mentioned before. In 1585-86, Kashmir was annexed and it became the part of Kabul province. So he took control of northwest frontier tribes, and he suppressed those tribes in northwest frontier province in the end of the 16th century, from 1585 till 1600. Kashmir was also part of the Mughal Empire at that time. Kabul was part of the Mughal Empire at that time. We know Fatehpur Sikri was founded in 1573, and there was a constant suppression of the empire in Mewar. First Uday Singh, then his son Rana Pratap Singh. So Akbar's rule was also comprised of many suppression of many uprisings in different states. He took certain decisions when it comes to religion. Obviously, introduction of Deen-e-Ilahi, his infallibility decree, how he had an Abadat Khana at Fatehpur Sikri. He also established a new city by the name of the town of Sikri in 1573. We know that. In later years, in the late 16th century, 1591, Mughal forces captured Sindh, and in 1592, Mughal forces captured Odisha. So they captured different areas, we know. Even eventually Balochistan and Makran also became part of the Mughal Empire. Then Pratap Singh's son was also he was also from Mewar, and he also continued anti-Mughal resistance. And Akbar was the first one who launched the campaign in Deccan in 1598, the first Mughal ruler at that time. But in fact, it was his son, whose name was Prince Salim, who rebelled against his father in 1602. He was the one who declared the fortress of Asirgarh in Deccan is captured after a siege by the Mughal forces. And who was leading them? Prince Salim was leading them. Prince Salim was the son of Akbar, who later on took the title of Jahangir when he came into power. Now, in 1602, basically Salim rebelled against his father, and he declared independence in Allahabad. He took control of Allahabad, so he was there. And there was a temporary reconciliation between both of them because of his mother was ill at that time. However, at the end of Akbar's period, which was in 1605, Akbar's health deteriorated, and Salim apologized before his father's death, and he was renamed as the heir of this particular he was the heir of the empire now. And Akbar died on 17th of October, and he was buried in Sikandra. Now, there's also a belief that Akbar was slow poisoned because he was such a strong king, and there was because we know that Nuruddin Salim, who was his son, he was against it. But the last 4 years that were close to his demise in 4 years of Akbar's period were consumed by his son, who had rebelled against him, and they were consumed by the rebellion of Salim, and how he wanted to have a reconciliation again with him. However, after his death, Salim became the ruler. Now, Salim, who took the title of Jahangir, was the fourth Mughal ruler, and his period was from 1605 till 1627. Now, Akbar was succeeded by his son Salim, who took the title of Jahangir. We know that, and which means conqueror of the world, literally. And he expanded the empire from Kangra and Kiswar, and he merged the Mughal control in Bengal as well. Even during the period of Akbar, he was the one who led the many military campaigns during his period in Bengal and East India, and he suppressed many uprisings in Bengal and Mewar. Now, he was renowned for his impartial justice, irrespective of people and their faith. Jahangir is famous for his interest in arts and culture, and because of his wife Noor Jahan. However, Jahangir was also one of the first Mughal ruler who established the relationship with the English. Now, Jahangir's relationship with the English around the time that the European traders had started to come to India, we know that the English found favor with Jahangir, who was interested because of art. And the first emissary or the first ambassador to the Mughal court was Sir Thomas Roe, and he visited the Mughal court during the period of Jahangir. He was able to secure many trading facilities for his countrymen during his period, and in fact, the company offered many goods for the European market from the European market to Jahangir, and Jahangir also sent a goodwill letter to that then English monarch whose name was King James I. Okay, now Jahangir's period was also filled with the uprising. In fact, Jahangir was also one of the first person or the first Mughal ruler who went against the Sikhs in the region, and this created the strife between both the Sikhs and the Mughals during this period. Now, Prince Salim, who was the son of Akbar and Jodhabai, was born in 1569. And in 1602, Bir Singh Dev assassinated Abul Fazl, who was one of the Akbar's Nauratan, on Prince Salim's directives. Prince Salim declared his independence at Allahabad. Now, 1602, before he took power, he was one of the Nauratans was killed. And he declared independence. As we know that he rebelled against his father, and in 1605 he ascended the throne after his father's death. In 1606, his son's name was Khosrow. He rebelled against Jahangir, and Jahangir dealt with him. And one other decision that he took, as I've mentioned, that Jahangir executed Guru Arjan Dev, who was a Sikh guru and the Khosrow's supporter. This was the first harsh decision that was taken by the Mughals against the Sikh, and which led to many other decisions that were taken by his successors. And from 1606 to 1613, there was a campaign against Rana Amar Singh of Mewar, which was failed, and Mughal campaign in South India obviously yield no result during this period as well. In 1611, Jahangir married Mehrun Nisa, who took the title of Noor Jahan. From 1611 to 1622, Noor Jahan was very powerful. She rose in power. However, Jahangir's power was decreasing over time. During this particular period, from 1613 to 1615, Prince Khurram, who was the third prince or the third son of Jahangir, he gets the Rana of Mewar to sign a peace treaty. And 1617, Mughal forces led by Prince Khurram defeated the joint forces in Golconda and Bijapur, and Prince Khurram signs a peace treaty after his victory in South India, and he was given the title of Shah Jahan in 1617. Now, the leader of Deccan broke the peace treaty immediately after in 1620. In 1621, there was a new treaty that was signed between the Mughals and the Deccan, and Kandahar was lost to the Persians during this time. In 1622, Noor Jahan's father died, and Noor Jahan's Janta was split into two factions. So basically, Noor Jahan was married before she married Salim, and her daughter from her first marriage was her daughter from the first marriage. She wanted her to marry Shehryar, who was the brother of Prince Khurram. And Prince Khurram was married to Asif Khan's daughter. Asif Khan was the brother of Noor Jahan. So basically, there were two alliances that were formed. One was Noor Jahan's alliance, which was with Shehryar, who was the brother of Prince Khurram. Khurram was the name of Shah Jahan. And the other was Asif Khan, who was in fact brother of Noor Jahan. And he allied with Shah Jahan because of his daughter. In the end, obviously, Shah Jahan rebelled against Jahangir, who was in control of his wife. And for 5 years, Noor Jahan rise, and Jahangir was busy in drinking, or he was a puppet in the hands of Noor Jahan. In 1626, Shah Jahan's rebellion was quelled by the royal forces, and in 1628, Jahangir died, and he was succeeded by his son, who took the title Shah Jahan, and his name was Prince Khurram. Now, Prince Khurram's reign was for 30 years, and um, Mughal rule during Jahangir's period, if we from before we go to Shah Jahan's period, was in decline, was reached its climax during Jahangir's reign. And in history of Mughal architecture, his reign was a transition from one grand phase to the other phase. Mughal architecture replaced use of sandstone with white marble. So all the buildings that we see from this particular period will be have are in white marble as compared to sandstone. Jahangir was also the only Mughal ruler who is buried in the modern day Pakistan. He was buried in Shadra in Lahore. And he was obviously succeeded by his third son, Prince Khurram, Prince Shahabuddin Khurram, who took the title Shah Jahan. Now, Shah Jahan ruled for 30 years. Shah Jahan literally means king of the world. And it was the title of Shahabuddin Khurram, was the third son of Jahangir. And he was also the fifth Mughal emperor. And he was the favorite um, of his legendary grandfather Akbar. Mughals achieved unparalleled success and zenith during his era. He expanded the empire to Kandahar in north and most of the South India. Now, the political struggle and succession to throne, we know that we've already discussed the political struggle of the Khurram. Basically, the political climate in the palace was different when Jahangir married in 1611. The Noor Jahan became an important figure, and so did her brother Asif Khan. Asif Khan's daughter was married to Khurram, and that is why Asif Khan supported Khurram. And Noor Jahan, who was the Khurram stepmother, decided to marry her daughter from a first marriage to Shahzada Shahryar, who was Khurram's younger brother. So she supported Shahryar for the throne. And we know that Shah Jahan revolted against his father in 1622, and the rebellion was stopped in 1626, forcing Khurram to submit unconditionally. However, when his father died in 1628, he succeeded after his father. Now, reign of Shah Jahan, art, architecture, and Taj Mahal. Shah Jahan imprisoned Noor Jahan, and this empowered him and let him rule more freely. And there was this unique development in art and architecture during this period. Marble dominated main architectural structures. The architectural wonders during this period include Diwan-e-Aam, Diwan-e-Khas, Sheesh Mahal, Delhi's Red Fort, and Moti Masjid in Lahore Fort. So these are 5 of many architectural wonders that were made during this period. He also founded the imperial capital city of Shah Jahanabad. During his period, he commissioned 999 gardens in Kashmir, where he would spend his summer. He had a peacock throne, or a takht-e-tos, which was worth of millions of dollars. He built Taj Mahal in Agra in the memory of his loving wife, Arjumand Bano, who was also known as by the name of Mumtaz Mahal. And the construction of Taj Mahal started in 1631, and it was finally completed in 1653. Now, after the demise and succession, Shah Jahan's era was called as the golden age of Mughals. And in 1658, when he fell ill, he was confined by his son Aurangzeb in Agra fort. And he spent his last days in this fort until his death in 1666. And he was buried next to his wife in Mumtaz Mahal in Agra. Now he was succeeded by his son, whose name was Aurangzeb Alamgir. We're briefly going to we're going to discuss Aurangzeb Alamgir in detail, and then we'll continue in the next lecture. So basically, Aurangzeb Alamgir's era was from 1658 till 1707. Aurangzeb was one of the Shah Jahan's son, and he was the 6th of the Mughal and last of the greatest to ever rule. He ruled for 50 years, and he fulfilled the great ambition of bringing the entire subcontinent under one rule. In 1687, he took the control of the Shia states of Golconda. And in 1689, he took control of all the southern India, which is 3.2 million square kilometers. 3.2 million square kilometers. Now, Aurangzeb battled to the throne. Aurangzeb kept 5 of his sons away from the court. The fear and the vigilance was obviously a result of his own battle of succession, the very famous battle of succession of Aurangzeb along with his brother Dara Shikoh, Shah Shuja, and Murad. So these were the four sons who were fighting for the battle of the throne after Shah Jahan. Shah Jahan leaned towards Dara Shikoh because of his eclectic beliefs. Aurangzeb obviously challenged his father's choice when his Shah Jahan fell ill. The war of succession broke out between the brothers, and Aurangzeb won. Shah Jahan was openly and completely in favor of Dara, and this forced Aurangzeb to imprison his father in 1658, where he passed away in 1666. Aurangzeb was obviously, as we mentioned before, he was criticized for his inclination towards Islam by Hindu majority. He also, because he re-established jizya, and this was one of the controversial decisions that he took. Aurangzeb became controversial among Hindus, obviously, after and also because of his strong pious lifestyle, and he let go of the lavish lifestyle that existed during Shah Jahan's period. He favored Hindu officials and he restored Hindu temples during his period. He, in fact, allocated Hindu officials in government, and contrary to the popular belief, he was tolerant towards the Hindus. He built one of the most famous Mughal structure, which is present in the modern day Pakistan, which is Badshahi Masjid in Lahore, and which was the largest mosque in the world for many years. The expansion and the eventual decline of the empire. Now, the empire, obviously, during Aurangzeb's rule, expanded farther than ever before. However, due to the lack of information and infrastructure during this period, it led to rebellions and misunderstandings. And it was extremely hard to manage the breadth of the empire. Aurangzeb ruled longer than any of his predecessors, but it could not stop him from the decline of the empire. Now, demise of the last of the Mughals, we're going to briefly touch it, and then, inshallah, in the next class, we are going to discuss in detail about the what led to the decline of the Mughal Empire and what were the causes. And we are, inshallah, we are going to complete the British arrival in India and British rule in India, along with the constitution and the political reforms they brought. Now, in the end, when Aurangzeb passed away, he passed away at the age of 88 in 1707, and he was buried modestly as he lived in an open-air grave in Khuldabad, and his grave was situated in the courtyard of shrine of Sheikh Burhanuddin Ghaib. Now, there were 17 legal successors to his throne. Prince Muazzam, son of Aurangzeb, was killed by his brother Azam Shah, and he took the title of Bahadur Shah Alam I, and he ruled for 5 years from 1707 till 1712. Okay, now we're going to end the class here. It's been almost 1.5 hour long class. Unfortunately, due to technical glitch, I couldn't open the video. It could have been more interactive otherwise. So we focused on the Mughal Empire and all the 6 different rulers of Mughal Empire. Inshallah, we're going to give, in the next class, we're going to give the brief recap of all the Mughal rulers and the causes of the decline. And we're also going to discuss the past papers in the next class. And we'll start with a new topic, which is the British arrival in India and the British rule in India and the political and the constitutional reforms of the British in India, which obviously, and then in the coming classes, we'll go on with the political struggle of the Muslims in India and the formation of and independence and the formation of Pakistan. Okay, so thank you so much for joining for today's lecture, and inshallah, see you next week. Allah Hafiz.